Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Amazon Music, Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Dennis Matthew. He's returning to the show to celebrate how Grizzly found gratitude. Please welcome back to the show former Boston area resident Dennis Matthew.
I miss Boston. I want to say the last time we talked, I'm thinking it was like spring of 2019 when we last talked, and I remember exactly where I was in our little apartment in South Hamilton, Massachusetts. And yours was one of the first podcasts I did back when I was just getting started. So as I was getting ready for this conversation, I was just kind of reflecting back on the last 2 years or so, and I always think of you and our friendship as one of the first launching pads, so to speak, that I got jumping into the author journey. So very thankful for you, and thanks for having me back on, bud.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yes, this has been a really fun journey for me, and I'm definitely thankful and blessed to have had the podcast, made many friends, and had a chance to meet many of these people in real life, like you and I had the chance to spend a day together at the Orange County Children's Book Festival. And it certainly would have been a different pandemic for me if I didn't have this podcast and a chance to speak to authors and a chance to speak with the people who listen. So really thankful for your friendship, thankful that I've been blessed by having this podcast. And I'm really excited to find out all about how Grizzly found gratitude.
Yeah, so really, Grizzly is a book, when I do my author visits, children always ask me, the one question I get asked a lot is, what inspired you to write this book? And so I always come back to telling my kids, self-reflection is one of those tools that I always use to write children's books. So a lot of times I'll look back on my own life and kind of tap into the things that I've been through, challenges I've overcome, and then I kind of communicate that story through the filter of a children's book. So, whether that's placing a story in a classroom or placing a story in the woods, it's ultimately, it always comes back to my story and something I've gone through. So, Bello the Cello, which was the first book that I wrote, is about me finding my gift, my calling, things of that nature when I lived in Boston. That was happening around the 2016-2017 period. How Grizzly Found Gratitude, my third book, is also about my transitioning from Oklahoma to Boston back when I moved to the Boston area in 2015. So, without me telling you, you already know Oklahoma is so different from New England. And so that transition, not going to lie, was very hard on me. Just dealing with changes in all, different areas of my life. And so working in the public schools, which I have been doing for the last 14 years or so, going into my 15th year as a speech pathologist, working in the public school setting, I come across children, and lots of them, that are dealing with transition, whether that's moving from one state to another, changing schools. Maybe there is, maybe the home is going through a change, whether it's a divorce or separation or whatever, grief. And then, I feel like all of us, the whole planet was going through transition, dealing with COVID-19. And so anytime you can bring a story to the classroom that helps children deal with transition, deal with a loss, how to cope with it, that's always, a good tool for a teacher to have in the classroom, a story that kind of encourages and teaches children how to come to a place of closure. In my own life experience, I've I've learned that, gratitude is one of those ingredients, one of those skills, attitudes that definitely help us move quicker to a place of closure. So I remember gratitude brings a lot of healing. So I remember one of the things that helped me adjust to my life in Boston was being grateful for the things that I had, and grateful for the people that I had in my life at that time. And just grateful for the things that were working for me. And so that essentially is the essence of the story here with how Grizzly found gratitude.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of things there that I want to touch on. Gratitude is certainly something that I celebrate, and I think there have been a lot of things written that there are definitely people who tend to look at the world differently. A lot of people look at the world as glass half full, and other people look at that same world as a glass half empty, and it's, oh, woe is me. I tend to be on the glass half full side. I didn't realize, I always thought that was just a stroke of luck, and that's the way I was born. And it probably is true, but there's a lot of science out there that shows that when we live gratefully, when we help our kids live gratefully and focus on the positive and being thankful for what we have instead of worrying about what we don't have, the kids actually live, and adults, we tend to be happier. We tend to be healthier. We can endure pain better. So I love that there are authors like you talking about this, because helping kids learn to live gratefully, I think, it's a wonderful gift to give our kids.
Yeah, and I love that you said that gratitude, the attitude of gratitude, doesn't just happen. There is some element of that. There is some element of a person's makeup that does kind of position or posture them to have an optimistic view on life. But I also think the posture of gratitude is one that takes intentional work sometimes. You diligently, intentionally have to sometimes take an inventory of what's going right. Because I think, anybody listening can point out to one or multiple things that needs work or is not going right their way. But, in today's world, gosh, there's, look all around, there's a lot to get down about. And the only way we, come above it is by intentionally looking at the bright spots in our lives. And it's also when we collectively do that as a community, as families, as classrooms, as schools, then you watch, whole groups of people or communities rising above their circumstances. And at the end of the day, we definitely want to teach our children that we are better than our circumstances, and we don't have to be defined by them, that we can, if we choose to, focus on the things that are working for us, and then also sometimes readjust the postures of our hearts and our attitudes to kind of teach ourselves to, kind of look at what is going right. And we draw energy from it to then work on the things that are not going right according to plan, right? So just a lot of, speaking from experience there, and this is what educators do every day with children, doing that tutoring, if you will. And so just kind of channeling that into the story. Absolutely. Yeah. I agree.
It's interesting. You talked a lot about the classroom, and that this is a great book, a great resource to have in a classroom, and sharing that you've been, before we started recording, you've been doing a lot of virtual visits. A lot of authors that I speak to, when they're speaking about their book, they're speaking first about the book, being used in homes, and gee, maybe if I can get into a classroom, that would be great. Do you write from a different perspective? As you're writing your books, are you thinking more that, wow, this is going to be great in a classroom? Do you think of that first? And then, and hopefully families will love it at home too.
Yeah, so I would say, when people ask me, what's your mission as an author? I kind of have a two-pronged answer to that. One, I write to the underdog in the classroom, because I was that underdog in the classroom all through, my education, pre-K through 12, whatever you want to call it. I always felt like I was the underdog in the room because I didn't know what my gifts were, what my calling was, how I fit in. And man, there are a lot of children that struggle with that. And so I write to that child, that is struggling to find his or her place in the world. But then the second kind of aspect to my mission as an author is to write for the classroom teacher. Stories are very powerful, especially, when you want to teach, curriculum, points, aspects of your curriculum, especially as it relates to English language arts. It can be taught using stories as a vehicle. And I feel like children receive it better. You can integrate it into the identity and the personhood of a child when you teach something using the vehicle of a story. Writing for the classroom is where that's my target audience. And so the public schools, and private schools too, any school, where education's being done is kind of my bread and butter. And so when I write, especially being a public school educator, I am trying to, yes, write a story, but I'm also trying to make that story curriculum relevant, by putting enriched vocabulary in there, putting diverse characters in there. So, again, going back to the fact that I'm a public school educator in 2021, I kind of have my ear to the ground in terms of what, I don't want to say hot button issues, but what, what teachers are talking about. I'm listening to that. I've got my, finger on the pulse, so to speak. And I have a feel for what teachers are looking for in children's books, in stories. And so I make sure that when I write a story, that it is, touching on all those subject matters, because, what's relevant in the, back in 1980, whatever, or in even the early 2000s, right, is not what's necessarily relevant now in the public school setting. I'm not trying to make a broad brushstroke there, but times change, and with that, conversations change in the classroom. Right now, we're in a season where diversity is a big subject matter. Equity is a big subject matter. Being trauma informed is a big subject matter. Social emotional learning is a big subject matter. The growth mindset, the 7 mindsets. All of these are things that a lot of schools are focusing on. And so I want to make sure that teachers have a way of delivering those important subject matters using the vehicle of a story. And so that's kind of what I have on my radar as I am writing. I always ask myself, how can a teacher use this character's dilemma at this point of the story? How can a teacher use that to teach certain concepts in the classroom? So, yeah, absolutely. The public schools are who I kind of focus in on. And then, by all means, parents have always reach out to me saying, my child has consistently been choosing your book this week to have me, read it to her before bedtime or whatever. So that's always a big affirmation and confirmation to the fact that I'm doing something good in this world. And I always love hearing from my parents, but my heartbeat is the classroom teacher. Absolutely.
You used a phrase, a lot of phrases, but there was one that kind of jumped out at me that I haven't heard before. That's the idea of being trauma informed. Can you kind of educate me and let me know what that's all about?
So being trauma informed is all about being able to identify, locate, be aware of what those signs of trauma look like in children. And trauma sometimes can be a word that's misleading when we think of trauma, we think of abuse, and there is definitely trauma in abuse, no doubt about it. But I would, and I would even say that those are extreme forms of trauma. But what does mild trauma look like? For example, this last year, as educators all over the country, as students all over the country, we're dealing with the constant fluctuation between virtual learning, in-person learning. Are we virtual next week? Well, we don't know. Let's wait to hear from the county on what our numbers are going to be, and then we're going to make that decision. Those, adults are better at sitting on the edge of our seat and waiting for the next curveball to come, but our babies are not equipped developmentally to kind of handle those kinds of last minute changes. And so, we all know that children need routine and structure and predictability, and the children need to be able to anticipate what's next and what comes after that. So, this is the first thing in my day, and then comes math, and then comes science, and then we're going to go to PE or whatever. Well, the entirety of, some of the 1920 school year, 2019-2020 school year, and for a lot of the parts of our country, the 2020-2021 school year was a big batch of unpredictability. Mm-hmm. Right. And so our children were dealing with trauma. That was traumatic on a lot of our kiddos. Now, also think of our babies that are coming from low socioeconomic homes, where there is, a single parent working multiple jobs. They don't have child care ready and available to be able to take care of those children who are now doing virtual learning, not being able to have devices for virtual learning. So there were so many problems to which the public school and having in-person education, in-person learning was an answer to, for a lot of households across this country, that all of a sudden they didn't have answers to those problems when you brought virtual learning into the equation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden mom's having to, I dealt with this personally. I have a student who is one of 4 or 5 siblings, and he is the youngest, and dad and mom are hardworking, and they work so many hours in the week. And when it came to virtual learning, his oldest sister, who was also a middle school student, was the one that was making sure all of the siblings were, logged into their classes, and they made sure that the scheduling of all those virtual classes were just right so that the one device that Johnny's using over here can then be given to Susie in the next hour. And then that same middle school student who is the sister has to take care of her schoolwork. She has to make sure lunch is good, breakfast is good, snack is good. The public school teacher and the public school school system, the cafeteria team, the essentials team, our educators were the answers to all those problems that were being, I shouldn't say problems, all those needs that were being met, that are being met while in-person learning is going on, right? The parents don't have to worry about where's my child now because he is in math or science or whatever, or he's in physical education, he's, having his social skills needs being met. He's playing with his peers. He's forming good bonds and friendships with his or her friends. All of those needs of the home family was being met up until COVID came in-person learning at the local public school. Well, you take in-person learning away, all of those needs and problems are now at home, needing to be addressed by these single-parent homes. So and that's not every family's experience. That's not the household that's not the experience of all the households in our country. But that was, more, at least half, I would say, of households that I've been dealing with had to deal with scenarios like that. That's trauma. That's traumatic. And so being trauma informed is all about, that's a long answer to your question, but just kind of circling back. But being trauma-informed is all about educating teachers, equipping teachers, training teachers on knowing how to identify trauma when they see it in a child, whether it be mild, moderate, or severe, and then teaching educators on knowing what to do next. If they can see those signs in a child that he or she is going through trauma, what does the classroom teacher do next? So that's what being trauma-informed is all about. And, you know, I try as much as possible to insert that, you know, a character coming to a place of conflict. How does he or she deal with that conflict, i.e. trauma, right? I try to put those problems, those real-world problems into my stories, because our children, and as time goes on, this gets younger. You know, even kids in kindergarten, pre-K, are smart enough now to pick up on the fact that we don't live in a perfect world. It used to be the case that, you know, I remember kindergarten education for myself back in 1980, whatever, 87. I didn't have a lot of problems to worry about. Dad and mom would drop me off at school. I went to school with other students also who came from households like me. You know, all of those households that, you know, had parents that were hardworking, marriages that were healthy, food on the table. You get what I'm saying? Like, most households were whole and healthy. And 1987 is not 2021. And so there's more brokenness in homes in 2021. And I feel like our little ones are picking up on the fact that there are cracks all around, and we need to teach our children how to live in a broken world. And I think you can't pass the buck down the road, kind of so to speak. You can't say, well, the third grade teacher will handle it. In age appropriate ways, as young as 4 and 5 years old, we need to teach children how to grow up in a diverse world, how to be okay with diversity, how to understand that not everybody has it like you do at home, or, you know, that we all come from diverse backgrounds, and how to accept people from diverse backgrounds. You know what I mean? All of those things. So that instruction has to start in 2021 all the way as young as pre-K, if not earlier. And so I try to kind of weave that into all of my stories so that my classroom teachers can find my books helpful as a tool in their toolbox, so to speak, as their instructors.
Yeah, boy, education sure that's a lot. Education sure has changed from the days of the 3 R's: writing, reading, and arithmetic.
That's right. So yeah, teachers, man. I'm gonna go on. I'll go off on another little soapbox here. Teachers have to do, man. We can't thank our teachers enough. We cannot thank, and I don't just mean public school educators, private, public, you name it. If you are a teacher, I bow down to you and I kiss the ground you walk on, because, you know, you are not, you know, my public school teachers, my classroom teachers are, in 2021, they're not just having to wear the hat of a teacher. They're having to tap into a whole lot more than that 4-year degree gave them when they went to college. They're having to be counselors. They're having to be dads, moms, big brothers, coaches. So, my gosh, yes, we absolutely have to respect, honor, and admire the hard work that our public school educators are putting into our babies, for sure.
And they're doing this at a time where their job is becoming more and more restrictive, where they don't have the freedom to be creative, to design their lesson plans around the needs and the abilities of the kids in front of them, and instead are expected to stick to a very structured curriculum and teaching to a test. And, teachers, hats off to teachers. You know? Absolutely.
And you know, and I've been very fortunate to work in schools with amazing principals, amazing leaders. And it always comes back to great leadership. And I feel like the great leaders in schools, like great principals in schools, have a way of giving those freedoms to their teachers to breathe, if you will, and still be able to kind of stay within the line, so to speak. You know, be able to teach those curriculum areas as their state requires them, but still allowing teachers to kind of bloom and blossom, to be creative, to where as needed, color outside the lines, if you will. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, I know you and I could talk forever, because when we're in California, we spoke for hours and it was wonderful. Unfortunately, we do have some time restrictions, so I want to make sure that people know where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about your great books.
Yeah, so Books by Dennis is a one-stop spot to kind of learn about me. I just had the website revamped, so booksbydennis.com is a great spot to go to. I would love to connect with as many schools as possible. I think since my journey started about 2.5 years ago, I've connected with around 120 schools, and reached around 70,000 students with my story. So booksbydennis.com. On social media, Twitter is a great spot to find me. My handle is Stories by Dennis. Instagram, my handle is Books by Dennis. And then, just Google Dennis Matthew, author, and a bunch of resources will kind of pop up. I agree with you, Jed. We first met at the book festival in LA. In person, we met for the first time. And it was like I had known you for decades. We just kind of hit the ground running. And I haven't talked to you maybe, or at least like had a serious conversation like this in a minute. But again, I feel, we start this conversation and there's no on-ramp. I feel like I can just connect with you because I think our souls and our purposes are very much aligned. As a matter of fact, there are times where I think of you and I go, man, I hope in 10, 20 years, 30 years, I can be Jed. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to say, I'm not trying to say you're old, bro, but you get what I mean. I'm new to this game. I just got started and I look at you and I think, man, this guy's a savant, a sage. Like he's been at it and I still see the fire in you, bro. You still have the passion. I remember seeing you get on that stage at the LA Book Festival in front of that audience and doing your thing. And I was like, I want to be that, to not lose the light, right? So you are just a standard bearer and a trailblazer to me. So I look up to you, dude.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate hearing that as I close in on 100 years old. It makes me feel good. We've had a great time speaking to the author of How Grizzly Found Gratitude, our friend, the author, the educator, and that's what comes out. You're definitely an author, you're a songwriter, you're a singer, but you are first and foremost an educator, and that comes through in your books, and it comes through in our time together. So really good work, and thank you for being with us. We've had a great time speaking with Dennis Matthew. Dennis, thanks so much.
Thank you, brother. Love you, sir.
You do not want to miss the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Kid Lit Royalty will be joining us. Jerry Spinelli, Newbery medalist, will be here to celebrate his brand new middle grade novel, Dead Wednesday. He's also going to be sharing loads and loads of great advice and wisdom for any authors who may be listening. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Dennis Matthew. Be sure to check out How Grizzly Found Gratitude. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Frazier. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to join together to thank you. Yeah, that's right, you. You are amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.